Solo and Bernard. Solo had made a new friend recently. After sneaking out of the house to go see his friend the vicar, unsuccessfully as the vicar had hidden in fear, Solo, on his way back, noticed a horse sticking its head over the gate leading into the farmer's field. The horse was a dirty brown colour with a large patch of white fur right between his large, friendly black eyes. He was watching as Solo approached him from across the road. He hadn't been there when Solo started his walk, so Solo decided to say hello. He walked up to the old wooden gate and stared up at the large animal. "Hello, I'm Solo," he barked. The horse whinnied his response. It turned out the horse's name was Bernard, and he had just been moved into this field and the adjacent stable. Solo really enjoyed making new friends, and as he had never been friends with a horse before, Solo really wanted to be friends with Bernard. Solo decided to settle in for a good chat, so he sat back on his haunches and looked up at Bernard while his new friend leaned over the fence to get closer to Solo. Solo really wanted to get into the field where Bernard was, so they could run and play together. And so he told Bernard he knew a back entrance to the field through a gap in the hedge. The hole was too small for a horse to get out, but it was the perfect size for Solo to wander through. Solo made his way down the edge of the field, which was bordered by a large, mature hedge. Sure enough, the hole was still there. Pushing his big head through the gap, he was able to squeeze through, although some of the branches poked him as he did so. At one point, the hole got smaller, and Solo had to crawl on his belly in order to make it to the other side. Bernard was waiting for Solo when he emerged, covered in dead branches and some leaves from the hedge. Solo paused and shook his body hard, shaking the remains of the hedge from his body. This could not undo the effect of the hedge on his fur. It was now more dirty than pure white. Solo never minded getting dirty. In fact, it was a mark of pride for Solo that he could be cleaned to within an inch of his life by the girls at Dirty Doggy Dog Wash, yet within a few minutes of getting home, he would roll around on the grass or in the dirt as he attempted to get his coat back to what he considered its natural colour. As Solo stood in the field next to Bernard, he now understood just how large a horse was, even compared to a big dog like Solo. But there they stood, a mostly white dog and a large brown horse. A passer-by would surely wonder what the dog and horse were doing together in an otherwise empty field, as it was a strange sight. But there they were, dog and horse. Suddenly, Bernard started to gallop around his field. "A game!" Solo thought, and immediately gave chase. Even an older horse like Bernard was much faster than Solo, so every so often he would slow down so Solo could catch up. Then, when Solo got close, Bernard would run faster, leaving Solo behind. Round and round the field they went, until Solo was exhausted. Even though he was a fit young dog, he was no match for Bernard. So he lay down in the middle of the field, his mouth wide open, his large tongue hanging out, panting heavily. Bernard walked up to Solo. "That was fun," he said. Solo was too out of breath to reply. He had no idea an animal could run that fast. After a minute, Solo had regained his breath and was able to stand up. Bernard took his extremely large head and bent his neck to nuzzle Solo's large doggy head. This was the sight that greeted Bernard's young owner as she walked across the field. a large white dog being gently nuzzled by her horse. She got closer and rubbed Bernard's flanks. "Hello, Bernard," she said. "Are you going to introduce me to your new friend?" Solo walked over to the young woman and politely stuck out a front paw for her to shake. "Well now, aren't you a polite fellow? Where did you come from? What's your name?" She bent down and read Solo's collar. "So you're Solo. Are you lost, Solo?" Now, everyone in the village where Solo lived knew that he would never get lost. But Bernard's owner was new to the area, and she had yet to hear much about Solo. "Shall I take you home, Solo?" she asked. Deciding she should probably see Solo safely home, she read his name and address on the collar, and realizing it was just up the road, walked Solo to his front door, where she rang the doorbell. Mum answered the door. "Oh, hello," she said. Then she noticed Solo. "Oh, I'm sorry. What did Solo do this time?" Solo's feelings were hurt. "I don't cause problems all the time," he thought. "Only once in a while." And even then it was with good intentions. "Oh, no," said the young woman. "He decided to make friends with my horse, Bernard. He's just down the road in some stables I'm renting. I think Solo and Bernard are now firm friends." Mum was relieved. Usually when someone showed up with Solo, it was because he had caused some mischief somewhere. Solo put out a paw, shook the young woman's hand, and, pushing by Mum, wandered inside to take a nap before supper. As Bernard's owner was leaving, she told Mum that Solo could come and say hello to Bernard any time he wanted. Mum had no doubt whatsoever that Solo would indeed do so. After all, Solo is a very sociable dog. In fact, the very next day, Solo decided to go and visit his new friend. He wandered down the lane to see Bernard. Not seeing him in the field, Solo squeezed through the gap in the hedge, across the field, and into the small stable, where he found Bernard staring out over the top of his stall. Solo looked up at Bernard. "Hello," Solo woofed. "Why are you in there?" "This is where I sleep," replied Bernard. "Oh," said Solo. "Want to come and play?" "I would love to, but the door is bolted shut, see?" Bernard lowered his head towards a large bolt that kept the door closed. Solo narrowed his eyes as he tilted his head sideways to examine the bolt. Solo decided this bolt wasn't going to stop Bernard from playing with him. So he jumped up on his hind legs and rested his front paws against the door. Then, using his teeth, he was able to wrestle the bolt loose enough that he could pull it to one side. The door sprung open a small amount. "Push it," he said. Bernard pushed the door, and it swung open. As Bernard was a big, strong horse, and he hadn't opened a door before, he pushed very hard. The door swung open, taking Solo by surprise. The door hit Solo, knocking him backwards. "Oh no," whinnied Bernard. "Are you okay, Solo?" Solo was a little winded, but otherwise he was unhurt. Shaking his body to get the straw from his back, which he picked up when he landed on the stable floor, he went over to Bernard. Bernard lowered his big head and nuzzled Solo. Even though he was a large creature, Bernard could be very gentle. Solo led Bernard out into the field. "What should we do first?" asked Solo. "Run!" Bernard yelled, and before Solo could say anything, Bernard began to run around the field. Solo, caught by surprise, gave chase. Round and round the field they went, barking and whinnying as they went. Finally, out of breath, Solo stopped. Bernard came up to him. "Why did you stop, Solo?" Solo, who was still trying to catch his breath, panted, "Well, I am out of breath." Bernard looked at Solo. "Come on, let's jump over those things." He pointed his head towards a series of horse jumps that were spread out around the field. "What are those?" Solo asked. "Look, I'll show you," Bernard replied, and with that, he set off at a run towards the first jump and, much to Solo's amazement, cleared it easily. Then, without pausing, he jumped a second and then a third. Looking extremely pleased with himself, he came back to Solo, who had managed to get his breath back. "Your turn, Solo." Solo looked at the jumps. Then he looked at Bernard. Then back at the jumps again. "You really want me to jump those?" he barked. Bernard nodded his head up and down. Solo, as we know, will try anything once. So he decided to have a go. "After all, what could possibly go wrong?" he thought. On Bernard's advice, Solo gave himself a long run at the first jump. Each jump was made from long, round pieces of wood, each painted different patterns and colours. They also towered over Solo. Solo knew from experience that he could use his strong hind legs to jump higher than many humans. But even for Solo, a dog with extreme confidence in his own abilities, the jumps seemed very difficult indeed. Still, Solo was ready to give it a shot and to show his new horse friend that anything a horse could do, a dog could do as well. Possibly better. Solo started his run. Faster and faster towards the first jump he went, and then, timing his jump to perfection, he leapt forwards, just as he had seen Bernard do. Only Solo hadn't quite timed his jump to perfection, for instead of jumping over the jump, he jumped through it. Somehow he had managed to jump between the various poles of wood before landing neatly on his feet. Thinking he had made a successful jump, he held his head and tail high in triumph and started to walk back to Bernard. But instead of Bernard congratulating him, Solo could see his horse friend was holding his head high and laughing. Solo was puzzled. Why was Bernard laughing? Hadn't he just proven that dogs were as good as horses? He waited patiently for Bernard to stop laughing. Then Bernard explained what had really happened, that Solo hadn't jumped over the jump at all, but between the pieces of wood which made up the jump. Dejected, Solo told Bernard, "Just watch, I bet I do it this time." Taking his time in order to catch his breath, Solo went back to start his run. This time, he was determined to run faster and jump higher than he had ever done in his life. This time, he would show Bernard what a dog could do. This time, there would not be any mistakes. This was it. Solo would make this jump for dogs everywhere. He started to run, putting every ounce of energy into his speed, never once taking his eye off the jump. On Bernard's advice, he would aim for the middle of the jump, not the side as he had last time. Once more, timing his leap to perfection, he leapt forwards, pushing harder with his rear legs than ever. He sailed through the air. He was going to make it. He could tell he was really going to do it. The top part of the jump had cleared his front legs. Now it was below his tummy. All he had to do was get his hind legs across, and that would be it. Victory for Solo and dogs. Unfortunately, just as he was clearing the jump, one of Solo's rear legs hit the jump hard enough that it dislodged the top pole. As Solo landed, the round piece of wood fell down and rolled towards Solo where he had landed, although not as gracefully this time. He was so tired after his run that his front legs had collapsed when they touched the ground, and he fell chin first onto the grass. As he lay there, slightly dazed, but safe in the knowledge he had made the jump, the large, heavy piece of wood was rolling and bouncing towards him. Too late he heard it coming. Unable to get up in time, his eyes widened as the large wooden pole got closer and closer. Then out of nowhere, Bernard appeared, placing a giant hoof onto the rolling pole. He stopped it dead in its tracks, inches from Solo's head. "I have to admit, Solo, I didn't think you were going to make it, but you did. Well done." Solo could only pant, his large tongue hanging out of his mouth as he did so. After a few minutes, Solo was able to stand up, and he walked with Bernard back to his stall in the stables. As they entered the stables, Bernard's owner came up to them. "Well," she said to both of them, "if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would never have believed it. A dog and a horse racing, then doing the jump, and then you, Bernard, protecting your new friend. Amazing." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "Fortunately for you two, I recorded the whole thing right here." She tapped her phone and played the short video of Bernard and Solo in the field together. A couple of months later, the video of Solo and Bernard had become a sensation, so much so that Bernard's owner entered it into a TV program, which paid prize money for the best video each week. The video won first prize, and Solo and Bernard were shown in their video on national television. The television company even asked for a new picture of Solo and Bernard. The one that Bernard's owner sent was of Solo hugging Bernard's head as they stood in the stables, with Solo standing on his hind legs as Bernard lowered his head. "Typical," said Dad to his family as they finished watching. "Not only does Solo make the newspapers, now he's a television star too. I imagine he'll get a big head over this." Solo, who had been lying on the living room floor as the family watched the program, knew that Dad was wrong. He wouldn't get big-headed over being on TV. That really wasn't important to him. What was important to Solo was that he had made a new friend, and that the friend had prevented Solo from being hurt. "That's what friends do," thought Solo. "And what could be more important than that?"